Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating and kind of provocative argument from author Christine Jones. She suggests that a foreign idea was secretly planted in the very heart of the American founding, like a cuckoo's egg in a nest, and that this one idea eventually grew up and pushed out all the original principles of the Republic. All right, so let's set the stage with a powerful idea from George Washington himself. He was convinced that for liberty to survive, the people, you and me, have to be constantly watchful, constantly alert. This idea of vigilance is absolutely central to the argument we're about to explore. And that brings us to the core, challenging question of this whole analysis. What happens when the very way a nation is taught to think actually makes it impossible to be vigilant? It's a huge question, and it's the engine driving this entire argument.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with that cuckoo metaphor. Then we'll look at the two competing philosophies at the heart of this story. We'll see how one took over, what the consequences were, and finally, what the author suggests we do about it.
So first up, let's really unpack this central metaphor. It's a powerful image that sets the stage for everything else.
So, if you're not familiar with cuckoos, they have this pretty brutal survival strategy. The mother cuckoo lays her egg in another bird's nest. Then, when the cuckoo chick hatches, it grows big and strong and literally shoves the original rightful eggs right out of the nest. The author uses this as a perfect metaphor for a kind of hostile, deceptive takeover of a nation's core principles.
Okay, so what were these original eggs in the nest? What was the foundational worldview of the American founders that, according to the author, got kicked to the curb?
The author gives it a name, participatory reason. Now that might sound a little academic, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's the belief that reality is, well, real. That truth is objective, and our minds are built to discover it, not invent it. It means moral law isn't just something we make up as we go, it's grounded in the fixed, stable nature of the world around us. And you can see this thinking crystal clear in this quote from James Wilson, who is one of the signers of the Declaration. He's basically saying that things like truth and rights aren't just convenient ideas we cooked up. He's arguing they are external, they are real, and they are woven into the very fabric of reality itself. And this, according to the author, is the key to understanding what the Declaration of Independence is really saying. When it talks about self-evident truths, it's not just being poetic. It's making a profound claim about metaphysical reality, about the fundamental nature of how the world actually works. It's saying some truths are so basic, you don't need to prove them. You just need to open your eyes and see them.
All right, so we've seen the original eggs. Now let's take a look at the cuckoo's egg, that foreign idea that the author claims staged this quiet takeover.
And this is where the German philosopher Immanuel Kant enters the story. The author argues that his idea of Kantian autonomy completely flips the script. In this view, the mind doesn't discover order in the world, it imposes its own structure onto the world. Suddenly, the source of truth and morality shifts from the external world outside of us to the internal, self-governing mind inside of us.
And this one single line from Kant really says it all. The will is a law unto itself. Think about that for a second. It's a complete revolution. It's no longer about conforming your will to some external, objective truth. It's about your own rational will creating the law that you follow. This is the core of that cuckoo's egg. So when you put these two worldviews side by side, the contrast is just stark. You can't miss it. One says reason discovers truth, the other says it generates it. One says moral law is external, the other says it's internal. We're talking about two completely different and fundamentally incompatible operating systems for a society. So, how did this happen? How did this new philosophy spread and, as the author argues, quietly displace the original framework of the founders? Well, she traces this story over the course of 2 centuries. And as you can see, this wasn't some overnight event. It was a gradual, but the author claims deliberate, process. It starts in elite academic circles in Germany, gets imported into American universities trying to be prestigious, and from there, it just seeps outwards into education, into law, into pretty much every corner of public life. The author really hones in on the American philosopher John Dewey as a decisive figure in this shift. She argues that Dewey is the one who took Kant's abstract ideas, kind of stripped them of their religious baggage, and then used the public education system to install them as the default operating system for generations of Americans. Truth was no longer about what corresponds to reality, but about what works to achieve social progress. So, what's the big deal? What actually happens to our republic when its philosophical foundation gets completely swapped out? What are the real-world consequences of this cuckoo's takeover?
And this brings us right back to George Washington. That call for vigilance, the author argues it becomes almost meaningless if truth and law are just subjective constructions. I mean, how can you be watchful for threats to liberty if the very definition of liberty is completely up for grabs? If there's no objective truth, what are you supposed to be vigilant about?
And the author details some pretty severe consequences. She argues that a population trained this way starts to struggle. They can't easily tell the difference between true liberty and just, raw self-expression. They can't uphold a constitution if its meaning isn't seen as fixed. And maybe most critically, they lose the ability to spot manipulation when the very idea of objective truth has been thrown out the window.
So, faced with what she describes as this deep-seated crisis, the author doesn't just diagnose the problem. She actually proposes a solution, and it goes way beyond your typical civics class. The core of her solution is this. Trying to restore civic knowledge is pretty much useless if you don't first restore our civic metaphysics. In other words, our shared understanding of reality, truth, and human nature. Without that shared foundation, she argues, teaching civics is like trying to build a house on quicksand.
The goal of an institute like this wouldn't be partisan. It would be ontological, meaning it would focus on the nature of reality itself. The whole point would be to rebuild that lost intellectual framework of the founding, and to train a new generation of leaders to once again think from a worldview of objective, discoverable truth.
And that's our explainer, which leaves us with this final, very challenging question from the author. It really forces us to think, can a republic actually survive once it denies or even forgets the very beliefs about reality that brought it into existence? It's a huge question that gets right to the heart of what holds any society together.